They said it was just an old farm, forgotten, isolated, and ordinary. But when the ground began to shake and the mist returned after 50 years, one man realized something beneath that soil was never meant to wake up. This isn't just a story about a farmer. It's a story about what happens when the earth remembers. Stay till the end, because what Thomas discovered will change everything you thought you knew about life beneath our feet. It was the kind of morning that felt almost too peaceful. A golden mist rolled across the fields, and the sound of roosters echoed softly through the valley. Thomas Hale wiped the sweat from his forehead, leaned on his shovel, and smiled at his growing cornfield. For 20 years this land had been his life, quiet, simple, and honest. His wife, Mary, had passed away 5 years ago, and since then, the farm had been his only companion. He woke with the sunrise, worked until dusk, and rarely left the property. In the village, people said he was a man who spoke more to the soil than to humans, and he liked it that way. That morning, however, something felt different. The air was heavy, and the birds were quieter than usual. As he approached his barn to feed the animals, he noticed the door slightly open, even though he was sure he had locked it the night before. He frowned, stepped closer, and pushed the door wide open. Inside, everything looked normal. The hay bales, the tools, the cows quietly chewing in their stalls. Then his eyes caught something strange on the wooden wall. A black mark burned deep into the wood, shaped like a spiral with 4 jagged lines crossing through it. It didn't look like a child's prank. It looked deliberate, almost like a brand. He reached out to touch it. The wood was still warm. Thomas took a step back. A faint smell of metal filled the air. Not smoke, but something chemical. He looked around, uneasy. No signs of intrusion. No footprints on the dusty floor. Yet, something, or someone, had been there. He decided not to tell anyone. The villagers were quick to gossip, and he hated attention. Still, the mark haunted his thoughts all day as he plowed the fields. When the sun began to set, he saw something shining under one of the corn rows. He dug around the spot with his hands and pulled out a small metal capsule, the size of a thumb, covered in mud. There were strange letters engraved on it, not English, not any language he recognized. At one end, a small latch was sealed with wax. He cleaned it with a cloth, turned it over, and stared at it in silence. Then, a faint sound, like a click, came from inside the capsule. Thomas froze. He looked around the empty field, heart racing. Nothing. Only the sound of wind brushing through the corn. He put the capsule in his pocket and hurried back home. That night, as he sat by the fireplace, he placed it on the table in front of him. The flame from the fire reflected on its surface. He thought of opening it. Curiosity burned inside him, but something deep down told him not to. He decided to hide it inside a wooden box near his bed. Then he blew out the lamp and tried to sleep. Outside, the wind howled through the trees, carrying with it a faint echo, a whisper that seemed to come from the fields. Don't let them find it. The next morning came quietly, yet Thomas couldn't shake the unease from the night before. He barely touched his breakfast, staring instead at the window where the fog still lingered across the fields. Something was wrong with the air itself, thick, heavy, and unnatural. He stepped outside, the cold dew soaking his boots. The animals were restless, even the cows wouldn't eat. As he reached for the chicken feed, a sudden metallic sound echoed from the direction of the old mailbox near the road. Thomas froze for a second, then began walking toward it slowly. The box door was swinging gently in the wind, creaking. Inside there was only one thing, a small folded letter sealed with black wax. He hesitated before touching it, but curiosity won. He broke the seal and unfolded the paper. The handwriting was elegant, almost official, and the message was short. Mr. Hale, what you found does not belong to you. Stay silent, destroy it, and forget what you saw. We are watching. Thomas stared at the words until his hands began to tremble. He looked around. The road was empty, but he felt eyes on him. He turned back to the house, locking every door and window he could. Hours passed. The sky turned gray. He couldn't stop thinking, who are they? He opened the wooden box beside his bed, taking out the metal capsule again. It seemed ordinary now, cold and harmless, but he knew better. When night fell, He placed the capsule on the table and stared at it under the lamp's yellow light. He thought of destroying it, maybe burying it deep in the woods. But something inside him said no. He needed to know the truth. Then, a sudden thud came from outside, a heavy sound, like a car door closing. Thomas's breath caught. He turned off the lamp and moved toward the window. Far down the dirt road, he saw faint headlights, then three dark silhouettes moving toward his farm. He ducked down, heart pounding, watching as the figures stopped near his barn. They were men, tall, wearing black coats and wide hats. One of them carried a lantern. Another held what looked like a metal detector. They whispered among themselves, scanning the ground. Thomas backed away from the window and grabbed his old hunting rifle from the corner. He hadn't fired it in years, but tonight, fear outweighed reason. The footsteps grew closer. He could hear the crunch of gravel under their boots. Then, silence. He held his breath. For nearly a full minute, nothing moved. Finally, the sound of engines roared to life, and headlights drifted away into the fog. They were gone. The morning after the strange men appeared, Thomas could barely think straight. He hadn't slept at all. Every sound outside the house made him flinch. The creak of wood, the call of crows, even the wind brushing against the windows. Something inside him had changed. The farm no longer felt safe. He stepped outside with his rifle slung across his shoulder. The footprints near the barn were still fresh in the damp soil. Large, heavy boot marks, unlike any worker or villager he'd ever seen. And the burned spiral symbol on the barn wall was gone. Not faded, gone. The wood looked freshly sanded, smooth and pale, as if someone had cut away the surface during the night. Thomas knelt down and touched the spot where the mark had been. The wood was still cold. Whoever came last night knew what they were doing. He looked around carefully. The silence felt wrong. Even the animals refused to come near the barn. The cows stayed in the far field, and the chickens hid in the coop. It was as if the place itself had absorbed fear. Thomas took a deep breath. "All right," he muttered to himself. "If you want to play games, I'll play too." He went back into the house and fetched an old camera that belonged to his father. He loaded a fresh roll of film, then returned to the barn and began taking pictures. The ground, the footprints, even the door hinges. He didn't know who would believe him, but he needed proof. By noon, he decided to visit the village. He hadn't been there in weeks. Maybe someone had seen the cars or strangers passing through. He put on his coat, locked the house, and started walking down the dirt road. The village was quiet, smaller than he remembered. Children played near the bakery, and the smell of fresh bread drifted through the air. For a moment, everything seemed normal. Thomas stopped at the general store, run by a man named Harris. "Morning, Tom," Harris greeted, polishing a glass jar. "Haven't seen you in a while." Thomas nodded. "Been busy. Listen, you notice any outsiders around? Black cars, maybe?" "Last night near my place." Harris frowned. "Can't say I have. Why, something happened?" Thomas hesitated. He didn't want to sound crazy. "Just thought I saw something strange." "Probably nothing." Harris chuckled. "You've been spending too much time alone, my friend. The mind plays tricks." Thomas forced a smile, but deep down he knew this wasn't imagination. As he left the store, an old woman sitting by the fountain called to him. "Mr. Hale," she said in a trembling voice, "you should be careful. The ones who come at night, they don't like being seen." He stopped cold. "What do you mean?" She looked around nervously before whispering, "They came for my brother once. Same mark on his barn. The next day, both him and the barn were gone. Nothing left but smoke." Thomas's throat tightened. "When was this?" "Years ago," she said. "People forget, but I remember." He thanked her quietly and hurried back toward his farm. As the sun began to set, a heavy fog rolled in again, thick. When he stepped onto the porch, he froze. His front door was slightly open. Thomas raised his rifle and pushed the door slowly. Inside, everything was silent. Too silent. The lamp he'd left on the table was shattered, the pieces scattered across the floor. And on the wall above the fireplace, another mark, burned into the wood. But this time, it wasn't a spiral. It was a single word, scorched deep and uneven. Return. Thomas felt his chest tighten. He backed away, gripping the rifle with trembling hands. Whoever they were, they'd been inside his home. He ran to the bedroom. The wooden box, the one where he'd hidden the capsule, was open, empty. He stood there for a long moment, unable to move. Then, from somewhere outside, he heard the faint echo of an engine starting and fading into the fog. Thomas stood frozen in the doorway, staring at the empty box. The capsule was gone, the only proof he had that something unnatural was happening. He rushed to the window, but the fog outside was too thick to see through. Only shadows moved within it, shifting like ghosts. Whoever took the capsule had been inside his house while he was gone. Thomas's heart pounded as he thought of the word burned into his wall. Return. What did they want him to return? The capsule or something else? He grabbed the old phone beside the window and called Harris at the store. No answer. He tried the sheriff's office, but the line was dead. Outside, the wind howled, and the fog pressed close against the glass like a living thing. Then came a faint knock. 3 slow taps on the front door. Thomas froze in place. The knock came again, louder this time. He gripped his rifle tightly and approached the door. "Who's there?" he called, his voice shaking. Only the wind replied. He took a deep breath and opened the door. No one stood there, only fog, swirling and rolling like smoke. Then he saw something, a small metal key lying on the porch floor. It wasn't the capsule. He bent down, picked it up, and noticed a tiny paper tag tied to it with a single word written in red ink. Barn. His stomach tightened. The barn again. Thomas took his lantern and walked into the fog. Every step grew heavier as the mist swallowed his light. Whispers echoed around him, low and distant. When he reached the barn, he unlocked the door with the key. The sound of the metal echoed through the silence. Inside, the smell of damp wood filled the air. In the center of the floor lay a shape covered by a black tarp. He lifted it slowly and froze. The capsule was there, open this time, glowing with a pale blue light. Beside it was a small recorder, playing by itself. A distorted voice whispered, "You were warned. The earth remembers." The light faded, and the barn fell silent again, until Thomas heard a breath behind him. Human. Real. He turned sharply, but the barn was empty. Thomas didn't sleep that night. He sat in the corner of his kitchen, rifle on his knees, waiting for the sun to rise. When morning came, the fog had lifted, but the air felt heavy, as if the land itself was holding its breath. He stepped outside, scanning the fields. Everything looked normal, except for one thing, the scarecrow. It was facing the wrong direction. He walked slowly toward it, boots crunching over the dry soil. The closer he got, the stranger it seemed. The scarecrow's straw hat was gone, and its burlap face had been replaced with a mask, a white mask, blank and expressionless. Pinned to its chest was a small note, "We watch what you guard." Thomas tore the note off, heart hammering. He looked around. The field stretched empty in every direction. But deep down he knew he wasn't alone. He ran back to the barn. The capsule was gone again. Only the tarp and the dirt pattern beneath it remained, as if something heavy had been dragged out during the night. Panic and anger boiled inside him. He shouted into the empty air, "What do you want from me?" His voice echoed through the valley. Then, in the distance, a flock of crows rose suddenly into the air, cawing wildly. That evening, Thomas sat by the barn with a lantern, determined to catch whoever was behind this. The fields were silent. No insects, no birds, only the soft hum of the lantern's flame. Hours passed. Then, out in the field, something moved. A figure, tall, thin, walking slowly between the rows of corn. Thomas raised his rifle and called out, "Stop right there!" The figure froze. For a moment, silence. Then it turned its head toward him. 2 small red lights blinked where its eyes should be. Thomas fired. The shot echoed, but when he reached the spot, nothing. Just trampled corn and a faint smell of smoke. He stood trembling, realizing this was no ordinary man. Thomas didn't leave the barn for 2 days. He barely ate, barely slept. The image of the red eyes haunted him every time he closed his own. On the third morning, he decided he couldn't stay trapped anymore. He needed to understand what was happening to his land. Armed with a shovel and his rifle, he stepped into the field where he'd seen the figure. The corn was crushed in a wide circle, as though something massive had landed there. He began to dig near the center. The soil was softer than usual, almost loose. After a few minutes, his shovel hit something hard. Metal. He cleared the dirt away and uncovered a circular hatch, half buried beneath the earth. A small symbol was carved into it, 3 lines forming a triangle, the same mark that had been on the capsule. His pulse quickened. This was connected. He tried to pull the hatch open, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked tight. As he wiped sweat from his forehead, he noticed something. Small vents along the rim, releasing faint wisps of steam. The ground beneath him trembled slightly. Suddenly, a voice called out from behind him. "Step away from it, Thomas." He spun around. It was Sheriff Dalton, his old friend, but his face was pale, and his eyes cold. Thomas lowered his shovel slowly. "You know what this is, don't you?" he said. Dalton didn't answer. Instead, he raised his revolver. "You shouldn't have dug here." Thomas's grip tightened on the rifle. "Tell me what's under there." Dalton's voice was steady but grim. "Things buried for a reason. Things we were told never to wake." Before Thomas could reply, the hatch hissed. A blast of air rushed out, carrying a strange metallic smell. Dalton fired his gun, not at Thomas, but at the hatch. The bullet sparked against the metal. The ground shook violently. Both men stumbled backward as the earth split open slightly, releasing a deep, mechanical hum. The earth groaned beneath their feet. Thomas and Dalton scrambled to their feet as the metal hatch began to glow faintly with blue light, the same color as the capsule. The hum grew louder, deeper, until it felt like the entire field was vibrating. Dalton shouted over the noise, "You don't understand, Thomas. It's not just a machine, it's alive." Thomas stared at him in disbelief. "Alive? What do you mean, alive?" Dalton's eyes were filled with panic. "It's been here longer than we have. The government buried it decades ago, said it was a failed experiment. But the land, it feeds off it." The ground split open wider, and a blinding flash erupted from the hatch. Dalton stumbled backwards, shielding his face. Thomas dropped to his knees, covering his ears as a sound like 1,000 voices filled the air. Then everything went silent. The fog that had haunted the farm began to rise again, swirling around them in a spiral. In its center, the capsule appeared, floating, glowing brighter than ever. A voice echoed inside Thomas's mind. "The Guardian has awakened. The debt must be paid." Dalton fired his gun wildly into the fog. Each shot vanished into nothing. Then a beam of blue light struck him, and he fell, silent, motionless. The fog swallowed his body. Thomas crawled toward the hatch, shouting, "What debt? What do you want from me?" The voice replied, calm, cold, ancient. "You disturbed the balance. You woke what sleeps beneath the soil." The light surrounded him now, lifting him slowly off the ground. He tried to resist, screaming, but his voice vanished into the wind. Then, just as suddenly as it began, the light dimmed, and the farm fell silent again. When the townsfolk came days later, they found the fields burned in perfect circles. The barn was gone. Thomas and Dalton were never found. But every night since, when the fog returns, the locals swear they can hear a man's voice echoing through the cornfields, whispering, "The earth remembers."